Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. Thank you for stopping by. So today is the second portion of head casting. This is specific for the plaster mix only. It is a 2-to-1 ratio, so that's 2 parts plaster to 1 part water. Now I'm no Heisenberg, but let's just go ahead and dive right into the math. Let's go. In order to give me my volume, I'm measuring length times width times depth for cubic inches. My measurements give me 720 cubic inches. Cubic inches converted to gallons is 3.12 gallons. My plaster mix is 2-to-1, therefore my gallons to cup brings me to 1.04 gallons of water, giving me 17 cups, and 2.13 gallons of plaster for 34 cups. And after all the math, and you're still with me, yes, science. Yeah, bitch. I am using Vaseline for my release agent for this mold, and I coat on the inside, very thin layer, and I get everything on the inside and including that's on the outside, because that's where my plaster is going to lay, to make sure that this head cast is flat on a surface. And do be sure that you go into the crevices around the nose and get those saturated with Vaseline. I am securing my mold with a bucket with newspaper at the bottom, and those are pool noodles holding it up on the side. But go ahead and make sure that you are using cold water. This will give you more time to pour the plaster into the mix. And here I'm fishing out a leaf. And when you do this, make sure that you do not pour and stir at the same time. You do not want to mix this plaster. You want all your plaster to be into the cold water before you begin to mix it. This will give you even a longer time to work and pour what you need into it. And again, fishing out a ladybug, make sure your water's clean. You want to sprinkle your plaster into the water as slow as possible, avoiding major clumps. And what you're going to see is that the plaster will sit on top for a few seconds and the water will dissolve it and push it down into the bottom of the bucket. And continue to do this as slow as you can. And again, do not mix this as you're going. You want all of your plaster to be in the water before you mix. It will give you a longer time to work with it and get your cups in, because I have to use 8.5 of these cups for this mix. And you see that big dump of plaster that went in? Do know that that will be a clump that you will have to get out later. So then I used a tool to make sure that I can control it a little bit easier. So just whatever works for you, but take your time. And eventually I'm going to speed up the process here and there, so you're not watching 14 minutes of me breaking my back to get this plaster into the water. I am using Dap Plaster of Paris. Now I have a 25-pound bag for this project. They do come in smaller containers of 4 pounds, and that works if you're going to make just a face cast. But for a project this big, I would recommend go ahead and pick up a bag of 25 pounds. It will leave you about 3 to 4, maybe 8 cups of plaster left over, and that's plenty to do other projects. But just go ahead and invest in a bag of 25 pounds. Work in a well ventilated area. As you can see, there is a good amount of plaster dust that fills into the air because it is a very fine powder. Maybe wear a mask if you need to. Yes, this is a very boring process of the whole entire thing, but it's absolutely worth it to take your time. Now, I did mix and round up my number for the water because I am pouring a base into a box. So what I want for this head cast is to be able to have it on my counter and be able to move it around without touching the head itself if I'm sculpting on it. So that's why I mixed a little bit more for a base, so I can swing that around and not touch it. And here I am putting in the half cup for my 8.5 portion of plaster. It is time to mix this all together, and I go in with a slotted spoon. You can use your hand for this. Just be sure that you're not using anything electric, because you want to mix this slowly to get all the clumps out. So the faster you whip and mix it, the sooner it will begin to set. So you want to keep it viscous and thin. And when I find clumps, I take my spoon and I mash the clumps into the side of the bucket, as you see me doing here. It will take a few minutes to get everything mixed together, but don't go fast. The speed you see me using here is just for a time lapse to get through this process a little bit quicker. I continue to remove clumps by pressing those onto the side of the bucket. I check to see with my finger if the clumps are indeed solid without powder into them. And also this gives me an opportunity to check to see how quick or how thick the mixture is getting. It took me about 10 minutes to get everything mixed together, but that's okay. That's what you want. You want to make sure that when you're mixing that it never gets stiff or hard to move your hand or utensil through the mixture. It is time to pour my mixture into the mold. This is a 5-gallon bucket, and with this 3 gallons, roughly 3 gallons of water, it wasn't too hard to pick up, but if you do need help, please ask for it. Now you see that when I pour into my mold that everything pretty much is smooth. There's a couple of clumps that might get into it, but don't be alarmed. If you see smaller clumps, that'll be okay. It will still set. But I make sure that I pour all of my plaster to where it comes out and up over the edges of the shoulder area of this cast. I am using a box lined with a garbage bag for my base, and I pour in what's left over and I get that into the bottom. It is time to remove any bubbles that you might have in this mixture, and I simply take my foot and I tap around the bucket, and you're going to see bubbles come to the top and they will burst. Just continue to gently tap until you see normal bubbles coming to the surface. And yes, those are me kicking in my Crocs. I am the Mario Batali of mad science today. I am going to do the same thing for this base, making sure that the plaster mix gets into each corner, and I take this box and I tap it onto the ground to make sure the bubbles come to the surface. I allow 48 hours for my mold to dry, and here is hoping that everything comes out okay. I removed my plaster gauze strip, and I'm sorry guys, I had one of those mini brain vacations. It was very late and I forgot to hit record. So here I'm showing you that the strips around the plaster is pliable. Don't be alarmed when you take it out of your bucket that you notice that it's damp to the touch. This is normal because of the Vaseline layer, and also because you're pouring water into the mold. It will be damp, but remove it gently from areas around your eyes and nose. And you see my base here broke when I took it out, and that'll be an easy enough fix with some super glue or some Gorilla Glue. You will notice that you might have texture from the plaster gauze strip of the mold, but that's okay. You can get that out later in the sanding process. And as you see here on the back of the base of the head, and this is what I was talking about, making sure that if you have long hair that you're not using the ponytail, but the area I had secured gave away during the molding process with the plaster strips and created these knots in the back of the head, but I will be sanding those out later. And you see you have a lot of texture around the eyebrows, the eyes and nose, and when I sand that, it will be with my hand, but I'm sorry, I wish that I had the footage, and so there's plenty more to do. So let's just go ahead and remove the smaller, thinner layers. They seem to be more embedded into the plaster itself, but take your time and remove to where you see the strips and the gauze go away. Now you might not be able to remove all of it at this time, but that's okay. Once you do that and you get the sanding portion into play, this will all be smooth and it'll look exactly the way it needs to look. I make sure when I'm moving this head cast around that I do not set it face down. I don't want to break off the nose, so just make sure that you're using it on each side of the face and continue to go around the areas that you need to get those plaster gauze stripped embedded into this plaster out of it. I know that neck piece is very rough because we had the plastic around the neck, but I would rather you protect your neck when you're cutting the cast to remove yourself out of it than not. So a little bit more time and finesse later on is what I recommend to make sure that you are safe and you're not harming yourself. In order to remove the Vaseline residue, I am using a paper towel and alcohol. Alcohol evaporates quicker, and depending on the release agent that you're using for your mold, you can use vinegar or Murphy's old soap. Some people put their cast into the oven to bake it off, but at this point I don't want to use any more moisture or heat. So here is my face on a counter. I know it's weird, right? But I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I hope that you got some good information out of it. Please let me know if you're going to be using this process with plaster casting, and hang out for part 3 because we're going to get into the sanding and the coating portion. We're going to attach it to its base. It's going to be fun, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.